Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of the WPCampus Podcast. Today we're going to talk about WordPress forms, something that, an area that pretty much every website has to touch at some point, whether it's something as basic as a contact form or something as complex as an online application. Higher ed uses a variety of online forms, and so today we just want to chat about that and kind of have a basic general discussion about how forms are used in higher ed and how people use WordPress, to create these forms. Before we get started, I always got to mention our conference is coming up this summer in July. We have tickets for sale right now for $99, so you can check those out on our website at 2016.wpcampus.org. We've selected speakers, and we're excited to announce those in the next coming days and to put the schedule up. So we're really excited about the sessions that we have in store, and we're going to be announcing a few sponsors soon. And so to get started, we have a great lineup of guests today. I'm Rachel Carden. I'm the founder of WPCampus. I worked in higher education for 10 years. I'm mostly a web developer and a little bit of a designer. And so we'll just start with the left. We have Curtis. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Curtis Grymala. I am technically the senior web technologist at the University of Mary Washington. What that means is I'm the one developer for the web here at the university. And I have been here at University of Mary Washington for 5 years now, something like that, 5 or 6 years. Been in higher ed for about 10 years at this point, and been working with WordPress for probably about 6 or 7 years, almost, basically full-time or more than full-time.
Awesome. Jeff?
So I am Jeff Matson, and I currently work for Gravity Forms maintaining documentation. I have been working with WordPress for quite a while. I can't even count the years. Quite a while. Just launched a new product called Notify Bot. It handles notifications within your site and includes support for Gravity Forms. That's me.
Great. Hey, Josh.
Hi, Rachel. My name is Josh Pollock. I'm the owner of Caldera WP. We make a lot of WordPress plugins, including Caldera Forms, which is a free drag-and-drop responsive form builder. And I've been using the WordPress for a while, let's say. Some period of time.
I love how you called it the WordPress. So we obviously want to talk about, super specific higher ed stuff, but before we get started, I kind of had a question for Josh and Jeff. As general form developers of these various WordPress plugins, if someone came to you and had never really set up an online form before, especially in WordPress, what are some things that you would share with them to think about ahead of time, like possible problems or concerns or just general notes?
I think one of the biggest things is really just determining what kind of form you're trying to create before you create it, and then who's going to be maintaining that form. So in that aspect, really just, if it's a contact form, you want to figure out what fields you already want to begin with. And then who's going to be monitoring that in terms of receiving notifications and actually able to really pay attention to that form.
So I would say a few things besides what Jeff just said. I think that starting with what does the form do is really important, but also how simple can you make the form, because the simpler the form, the better it's going to convert, the more people you're going to get to fill out the form. So asking too much is counterproductive. Making it too complicated to fill out is counterproductive. I would also start out, though, with the server with your WordPress site. Forms can be pretty complicated applications, so you want to make sure your server works, and that means can it send an email? If you're using a WordPress site, you need to make sure you can send a password reset email first, just as a baseline. And this is where a transactional email service comes in, something like Mandrill or Amazon SES. These things are great if you have any volume, you have any sort of questions about your server. But also, make sure that you're testing with WP debug true, but also WP debug log, which will write a log of errors. Because forms are complicated, and they can tend to like find the weird symptoms of things that are wrong on your site, and those will throw off like JavaScript and things like that. So just really thoroughly test your site on staging, on a local environment using desktop server or something like that. I think that that like making sure that before you start and then once you've built your form that you're not generating any errors is just so important. That you could like run the whole process with a clean debug log.
Curtis, do you have anything to add about like what you would tell someone in higher ed that would, I want an online form?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a ton of different things, and especially in higher ed, typically when someone says I want an online form, what they really mean is I want you to upload this PDF. And so a lot of it is simply getting them to, and as Josh mentioned, I think, a lot of it is also the simplicity. I mean, in higher ed, we tend to, like I said, we want to upload PDFs for everything, but we also tend to want to collect someone's entire life story just so that we can, send them an email or something like that. In fact, at my previous employer, somewhere along the line, somebody had decided we were going to streamline the process because we had 7 or 8 different departments asking for essentially the same information. And so we streamlined the process, well, I say we, it was before my time. They streamlined the process by turning it all into one single form, but the problem was that form had probably 150 to 200 inputs, where they were asking people for literally every single thing about them. And all of these inputs were required. There, I mean, I imagine at most one person actually completed this form per month, because it was just too long and complicated for anybody to actually do. So it's about understanding the purpose of the form, so that a PDF 1 out of 100 times is actually going to be the correct application for it. But most of the time you can do this a lot more simply with an online form. But you need to understand what the end result is intended to be for that form, and then also just make it as simple, as Josh mentioned, make it as simple as possible, because people are not going to convert if it's too difficult to fill out that form.
Something else that I think is commonly overlooked, especially in higher ed, is just like also thinking about like what the workflow is going to be like when the form is submitted. Like who's going to get the information and who's going to take care of it. Like there's a life for this form beyond the user filling it out, and that was often overlooked before. They just think that we're going to set up a form and like magic's going to happen and people are going to be contacted, and so it was the project moved on beyond just setting up a couple fields on a website.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree and use it as an excuse to throw in a shameless plug. Is that like you put out a form and you're like, oh, that works for me, and like I think that's smart, and that's like a really big assumption. And until you have analytics data to like prove that people are actually going to like view your form and submit your form or what they're doing instead, you're really not done, right? Like you make a great looking form, you make sure it works, but then you want to like test it in the wild and see how it works. And we make a plugin that works with both our form builder and the Gravity forms and the Ninja forms. It's called FormWorks. It's at form.works. Does your form work? But it's like analytics data for forms. So it'll tell you like where were they before they left? Did they ever even scroll the form into view? These sorts of things. How many fields did they engage with? And it's really good for that sort of like ongoing. I made a form. It looks good. It functions. Why doesn't anybody ever submit it? And it'll tell you those things. I don't know. I think it's an important step. You can also do something similar with Google Analytics, but don't just fly blind, I think is really the point.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yes, you should check it out at form.works if you think it's really cool. There's awesome photos of all these fun graphs, and it works with all the form builders.
So that's important, I feel, on not even just a something that's specific to forms, but really just across your entire site to begin with. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that
Totally.
that really just disregard analytics and just say, well, the site's up, and maybe it gets a couple hits, or they're only monitoring how much traffic it gets, but not where the traffic is and how the traffic's flowing. I think that's something that more people need to look deeper into, and then and see, oh, somebody came in on this page, and then they hit this page, then they started filling out this form, but they stopped here. Why did they stop here? And then really analyzing, especially if you're not getting a whole lot of submissions, to figure out where on the form the trouble spots are. You know, if you're asking for somebody for their social security number halfway through the form, that may be your reason why your forms aren't getting submitted. It's not that people aren't starting and interested, they just don't want to give you your social security number.
So that's a great segue into my next question, getting into some more higher ed stuff. So in higher ed, you know, we can't just pop up an online form a lot of the times. We have restrictions. And so one of them being FERPA, and that we have privacy concerns and the kind of data that we can, I guess, collect and access, and so things like that. At my last institution, we weren't allowed to set up online forms that collected any kind of like FERPA identifying information. So like we couldn't collect a social security number, not on a WordPress site. We couldn't collect like a student ID. We couldn't store information basically in a database alongside just kind of front-end, you know, informational content. And so we had to be more creative about stuff like that. Like we could do basic contact forms and things like that. We would get around it a lot of times by just asking for their student email address, you know, and then we would use that to get more data later, kind of thing, if we needed it. So there are some, you know, some kind of hurdles that higher ed has to jump. And so on top of that, there's also the notion of FERPA, of like, if this information, let's just say this information like was stored in WordPress, let's say their student ID or their social, then you have to think about like who's going to be able to access that information, the admin. So if you have like student workers that have user accounts, you know, then they can't access that information and stuff like that. So there's this like long list of, you know, kind of things you have to think about in higher ed when you want to set up a WordPress form. And so you have anything to add to that, Curtis?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, yeah. I mean, and it's not, a lot of it does have to do with FERPA and who has access to those sorts of things. Some of it also has to do with simply kind of division of responsibilities. And so, you know, our public web server is optimized for one specific thing, and that's serving public web pages. It's not necessarily optimized for collecting or storing that kind of personal information. It might not even be PCI compliant. For those unfamiliar, PCI compliance has to do with financial transactions and things like that for the most part. But you know, a public web server doesn't necessarily have to be PCI compliant, but if it's not PCI compliant, then we shouldn't be collecting any of that type of information either. And so a lot of people tend to think that just because they added an SSL security certificate or something like that to their domain name, that means they can now collect and store sensitive information. And it goes a whole lot deeper than that. And a lot of people just need to understand that kind of information, A, there should be a division of responsibilities, and if there's another way for you to get that information, then you shouldn't be collecting and storing it on your public web server. But B, that security brings with it a lot of potential, you know, those types of things like SSL certificate or even potentially encryption on the database are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the security that's actually required for that sort of collection and storage.
You know, and I've actually seen for anybody who's listening that isn't quite familiar with me, I previously worked for a web host before coming to Gravity Forms, and I've seen some things. I've seen some very, very scary, terrifying things. I've seen I've seen educational institutions that are, you know, running on shared hosting that are collecting personal information and storing all of their emails in plain text. I mean, there's so many things that you really need to pay attention to on your host, because it's not your host's job to know what you're doing on your site. Your host's job is to make sure that, you know, your site's up and running and everything's running smoothly. So, if you have a specific requirement for the data that you're using or collecting, you need to make sure that you specifically state that with your host and provide them with the list of requirements. Don't just say it needs to be compatible with this, because a lot of times the host, it's like, I don't know, I don't know every regulation in the world. And so give them a list of specific things that you need based on those requirements, and then they'll definitely be able to help you out. And by all means, don't use shared hosting.
So, like, even if, like, the answer to this problem is just that you need to think about this, so that way, if you have this complex application taking in all this sensitive information, you need to work with whoever else on campus builds, these more secure environments for applications. That's what we did. We had people dedicated to building basically the online applications that collected all this data. That was their job. So in my workflow, it was simply make time to put this on their calendar and talk with them and realize that I can't do this part, someone else has to do it, and things like that. So, it's basically just keeping in mind, with anyone in general, but also in higher ed, of just, it's not just that easy to just go plop a form on your website, that these things have to be considered and these concerns have to be raised and stuff like that.
And personally, I would add that, again, there's always a separation in, again, it comes back to that, what do you want this form to do? A contact form is not the same as a quantitative survey, is not the same as a payment gateway, and so, or e-commerce. And so these are three completely separate things, but a lot of people think they can use, they can and should use the same tool to solve all of these particular issues. And that's generally not the right answer. I mean, there are some tools and add-ons and things like that for various things that can make a contact form builder turn into a quantitative survey processor and things like that. But that may or may not mean that that's still the correct, solution to that particular problem. So again, it's a matter of making sure you're using the right tool for the job that you have at hand.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So to add to the using the right tool, also make sure that you're using the right person as well. So whether you're calling that person a tool or not, make sure that you're using the right person to do the right thing too. I mean, your developer or even your designer, most definitely, are not server admins. Don't use them to secure your server. And then in the opposite side, a lot of server admins are really smart people. They know a lot of security stuff. But I know some top system admins that are specialized in security and do an amazing job, yet they couldn't tell you a thing about security. So make sure that the right person is the person that's handling the task itself. Don't be cheap and hire one person to do everything. I try to get me to do some design or something. It's not going to happen. It's going to be black and white with some check boxes here and there and no styling. So make sure you have obviously the right person for the specific job, whether it be server admin work or security or development. And there's definitely no shame in hiring a little bit of contract work here and there.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, if you're listening and you're in higher ed and maybe you're a faculty member who needs a form, well, what I'd recommend is just making sure you talk to the right people and talk to your IT department and talk to your whoever's managing your server and things like that, and just make sure you kind of cover all your bases and talk with them about what you want and what you need, and think about that kind of stuff before you just pop up a form. We had issues. I would find these online forums where people were collecting like seriously sensitive data on like a Google form, and things like that. And I didn't necessarily blame them. They didn't know. And so as like web developers and web folks on campus, something you also can do to help is just awareness and education, and just telling people. And a lot of people set up these forums and do these insecure things because they don't know. They don't know that it's insecure. They don't know that it's bad. And so a lot of my job, I felt like, was just educating and telling people that why this is not a good idea, and here are some other options that we can put in place.
I would add to that, make SSL your default. You know, I tend to see lots of people who say, like, I'm not doing e-commerce, I don't care, right? Because you need SSL to do e-commerce, or your payment provider will delist you. But it's just like, who knows what's going to go through your site besides a username and password for your administrative user, which you know will go through. But like, who knows what's going to go through it tomorrow? Just like, it's gotten so easy. And even if you're not doing e-commerce, most hosts now provide Let's Encrypt for free, and it's just there, it's free. Just do it. Like, it's the longer you wait, the bigger a pain it's going to be to switch. And I think making that your default is really going to help you in the long run, and save your butt when you like find yourself in a situation that you probably should have already been there on.
Well, extra little bit of incentive as well to encrypt your data is, of course, because Google has decided that everybody should encrypt everything. So, which is good. It's most definitely good. But it does also help your search engine rankings as well if you're encrypting everything and using HTTPS by default.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's a totally different animal that we could probably discuss for another full half hour. But I mean, there's politics, and there's the snail's pace of higher education as well that goes into that. So it's a great recommendation, and I support it 110%, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% realistic at this moment within a lot of higher education institutions.
It really depends on the institution. My last one, starting like a year ago, every site going forward had it by default. So that was great. You set up a site, it's going to have it. But that's definitely not the case everywhere. But yeah, totally what Curtis just said. So that kind of segues a smidgen into the next topic, just talking about improving SEO. Something else that improves SEO is accessibility. And it's a topic we've discussed several times. We discuss it a lot in higher education because if you receive federal funding, you're required by law to meet certain accessibility standards, Section 508 to be exact. And so it's a topic that we talk about a lot, and I think it's a very important topic, as whether you're required by law or not, you should want your site to be accessible and to everyone, no matter their disabilities or other topics. And so something that is kind of a big deal in forums because they're more complicated when it comes to accessibility, and so it's something that I guess we can discuss for a little bit, but like just kind of talking about general plugins and things that people use. To be honest, I don't really think that there are any WordPress form plugins right now that are just like 100% accessible. And so it's something that needs to be discussed and kind of looked at. That, I mean, pretty much, I know I use a lot of Gravity Forms, and it has some issues with accessibility. And I know that a lot of people in our community use Gravity Forms along with other plugins. But I do know that, I mean, it's definitely got to be a problem, as the plugin it doesn't meet all the accessibility standards, and so therefore I know a lot of us are probably having accessible forms on our website, but so I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
So from my chats, I have quite a bit of chats with Amanda Rush, and of course, for anybody who's listening that doesn't know who Amanda is, she does a lot of work on the accessibility team for WordPress, and she also happens to be blind. And she's gone through and she has found definitely some accessibility issues with Gravity Forms, for sure, because I think the biggest thing is that we don't necessarily know accessibility as well as an accessibility specialized person does. And I think it's always a good thing to really have certain people that have those particular needs to actually go through and use your solutions, whether it be just the front end of your site, or whether it be a specific form plugin or anything like that. Actually have that person physically go in and try to complete those forms. And I guess she recommends Gravity Forms all the time. So I feel like at least there's a solid bit of accessibility baked into Gravity Forms. But of course, there's always things that can be better because we're not accessibility specialists. We're developers. And while we'll do as much as we can, sometimes we just don't know.
I want to add in real quick. I hope that I didn't mean to let's just start hating on Gravity Forms not being accessible. I only mentioned that because I do know a lot of folks in our group use it, and I use it. I love Gravity Forms. I'm totes on board. So basically, I guess it's what can another question might be what can we as a community, as a WP campus, is there some there's something that we can do that we can help test or we can help add things or do whatever it takes, because I know a lot of folks use it a lot, and whatever we can do as a community to our collective mindset to kind of help make improve, I think that would be something we could get behind.
Well, and I would say, first of all, one way to quickly improve the accessibility of Gravity Forms, from a user/admin standpoint, is there's a pretty good plugin. I think it's called WCAG 2.0 Gravity Fields or something like that. And what that does is it kind of rewrites the way Gravity Forms outputs various fields in order to make them more accessible. So, for instance, one thing that Gravity Forms, and I think potentially other Forms plugins do as well, is for advanced fields like the name, where you're collecting first name and last name. What Gravity Forms does by default is it outputs a label that it then associates with the first name field for name, which is to apply to the first name and last name, but it associates that with the first name field. But then it's also got a second label that it also associates with first name where it says first name. And what the WCAG 2.0 plugin does is it takes that and it turns that first label into a field set legend instead. It wraps the field in a field set and turns that into a legend instead of a label, because one of the accessibility issues is that you shouldn't have more than one label apply to the same field, because it can be confusing to users trying to get through that system. And there are a number of other things that plugin does as well. And I can also say, from my experience at least, the developer of that plugin seems extremely responsive. I asked him to make one or two minor changes to it. In fact, I think one of them was to wrap things in field sets like that, and it was maybe a week later he'd released a new version that did that for us. So, that plugin's a good place to start to make Gravity Forms more accessible. I'm not sure if there are other applications like that for some of the other form builders or not, or I assume that some of them need them as well, but I haven't investigated them too deeply. But that said, also from a Gravity Forms perspective, if Gravity and Rocket Genius wanted to start working on these types of things, that would be a good place to look for what could be done with the plugin to improve it, improve its base functionality, and potentially work with that plugin developer so that he can pull things out of his plugin as they're adding them into Gravity Core.
Oh, certainly. One of the biggest things I think that can help the community a lot more is actually reporting these accessibility issues. We don't know that there's an accessibility issue until somebody tells us. So the best thing to do is if somebody finds an accessibility issue like what you're describing, just send us a ticket. Just shoot us an email. We're always around, or just ping us on Twitter or something like that and say, hey, look, there's an accessibility issue here. Here's the general idea of how you would fix it, because once again, we're not accessibility experts, and most developers aren't, and so it makes it a lot harder to tackle those things when we really don't know what we're doing when it comes to accessibility sometimes. I mean, we know general guidelines, but when it comes to that specific scenario, I personally didn't know that. Oh, my dog's trying to deliver toys to me. So yeah, just make sure that, whether it be Gravity Forms or Caldera Forms or Ninja Forms or whatever other plugin you're using, just be sure to report to the plugin author that there is an accessibility issue. That way, hopefully, we can get it resolved.
So that, man, that's great. It's just something to share with our communities. When you come across these problems, just contact the developers. You know, whether it's Gravity or whether it's Josh at Caldera or the Ninja folk. And so anything that we can do to kind of help improve. Also, I mean, like, right now it's mostly just kind of, like I said, federally funded, like, institutions and companies that have to meet these requirements, but there's more and more, like, movement towards requiring just pretty much any business to be accessible. I think in a couple years from now, there'll be a lot more requirements for just about anybody or just about any website. And so kind of the more that we in higher ed can do to help, you know, the software get ready and help websites get ready for the businesses, I think it's a win-win for everybody. Well, anybody else want to add anything else about accessibility? We're almost out of time. I did kind of want to chat for just like a few minutes about some ways that like forms are being used in higher ed and some interesting things. I don't know if Curtis has any to share, but you know, there's obvious stuff like contact forms and then there's online applications. But you know, there's all kinds of stuff from like reservation requests, forms, and there's lots of buildings in higher ed, and so you have stuff like that where people need to reserve space. I've set up forms for people to request access to, you know, to buildings and to specific rooms, not just necessarily reserving them for an event. Do you have anything interesting to add to that, Curtis?
You know, I mean, we've got a few different applications that we're using, and one of them is on our website. What we've done is we've built in, you know, as opposed to just having like webmaster@umw.edu being like a mail to link or something in the footer of our site, we've built a form where they can click the link that says report a problem with this page, and it takes them to a form that then, you know, in the hidden data behind the form, it tells us what page they were on when they clicked that link. And so they can just choose from a couple quick options, like there's a broken link on the page or a broken image or something like that, but they also have the option to add additional information, and then they can just submit the form. And so we get a form where the user has to do very little work in order to report a problem with any of our pages on our site. We've got, you know, we've also got various forms, like, for instance, you know, our entire directory is stored in WordPress, you know, employee directory and things like that. But we've got forms set up so that if an employee has a problem with their profile or wants to change it or anything like that, they can submit a form to have that go directly to our issue ticketing system, where, you know, any of us can then pick that up and edit the WordPress profile, you know, directory profile, because some of that information is not yet editable specifically by the users, but it's also obviously not editable by other users that may notice issues with people's directory profiles. So we've got those kinds of forms set up. We've also used various things, like for a particular news release, we set up a quiz. We had 5 different bird sounds because the news release was about some, you know, instructor teaching how to identify birds and things like that. So in the news release, we added a quiz that was, you know, here are these 5 different wave samples or MP3 samples, and they could identify which was which, and you know, get an immediate response from that as to whether or not they were, you know, they were correct on identifying the bird sounds. So.
That one was definitely unique. So yeah, so basically, like, higher ed is just filled with all kinds of not only random websites, but you know, various needs. You know, you've got everything, like Curtis said, from most higher eds have like news sites, and you've got your departments, but you've also got all these like crazy programs and initiatives that pop up, and you've got research, and you have all these different categories. So there is a plethora of form examples, I imagine, across higher ed. If you have any interesting examples of interesting forms that you've set up on your website, tweet them at us, either our WPCampus org Twitter handle, or use the WPCampus hashtag. And so we'd love to see them and share them. But I think that's it for today. I think we're done. And so huge thanks to Josh Pollock from Caldera, and Jeff Matson from Gravity, and Curtis from UMW, and I'm Rachel, and we're glad you could join us. And if you want to learn more about our community, you can visit our website, WPCampus.org, and you can get involved. And we hope you'll be able to join us this summer at our conference. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.